On the morning of November 15, 1959, in the small farming community of Holcomb, Kansas, a discovery shattered the quiet of the Western Plains. Inside a well-kept farmhouse, 4 members of the Clutter family were found dead. The victims were Herbert William Clutter, a 48-year-old wheat farmer respected across Finney County, his wife, Bonnie Mae Fox Clutter, age 45, their 16-year-old daughter, Nancy Mae Clutter, and their 15-year-old son, Kenyon Neal Clutter. All 4 had been killed in their own home during the night of November 14th into the early morning of November 15th, 1959. At first, the crime made no sense to anyone who knew the family. Herb Clutter was a prosperous, methodical man. He kept no cash on hand. He had no safe in the house, and he conducted all of his business by check. There was no fortune to steal. And yet, from the home, the intruders took only a small amount, approximately $50 in cash, a pair of binoculars, and a Zenith transistor radio. The investigation was led by Kansas Bureau of Investigation agent Alvin Dewey. For weeks, detectives faced a case with little physical evidence and no obvious motive. The killers had entered through an unlocked door and left behind almost nothing to identify them. In a tight-knit town where doors were rarely locked, the murders spread a deep and lasting fear. The funeral was held on November 18, 1959, at the Garden City Methodist Church. Approximately 1,000 people attended to mourn a family that had been part of the fabric of the community, a reflection of how widely the Clutters had been known and respected. The break in the case did not come from the crime scene. It came from a prison. A man named Floyd Wells, who had once worked as a farmhand for the Clutters, had later served time behind bars. There, he shared a cell with a man named Richard Hickock. Wells told Hickock about the Clutter farm and, crucially, about a safe he believed held $10,000 in cash. That safe did not exist. Herb Clutter kept no such money. But the story took root, and it set in motion the plan that would end 4 lives. Hickock, together with Perry Smith, another former inmate, traveled to the Clutter home, acting on that false belief. On the night of November 14th into the early hours of November 15th, 1959, the 2 men entered the house through an unlocked door. They were armed with a knife and a 12-gauge Savage Model 300 shotgun. When there was no safe and no fortune to be found, the family was murdered anyway. The men left with roughly $50, the binoculars, and the transistor radio. For weeks, Smith and Hickock traveled, moving across the country, while the investigation pressed on. It was Floyd Wells who ultimately provided the information that pointed authorities toward the 2 men. On December 30th, 1959, Richard Hickock and Perry Smith were arrested in Las Vegas, Nevada. On January 6, 1960, they were returned to Garden City, Kansas, to face justice for the killings. The trial began on March 22, 1960, in Garden City, in Finney County, and was held before Judge Roland H. Tate. It concluded on March 29, 1960. According to reporting from the Washington Times and the Associated Press, the Finney County jury deliberated only 40 minutes before reaching its decision. Both men were found guilty of 4 counts of murder, 1 for each member of the Clutter family. As the Great American Trials reference records for the case, the verdict was guilty, and the sentence was death by hanging. On March 29, 1960, both Richard Hickock and Perry Smith were convicted on 4 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. The legal process did not end there. Hickock and Smith spent more than 5 years on death row, while their court-appointed attorneys pursued appeals. Federal lawyers tried 3 times to have the case heard by the United States Supreme Court. Each time, the court declined to take it up without comment. The conviction stood, never vacated, never reversed, and never overturned. On April 14, 1965, both men were executed by hanging at the Kansas State Penitentiary. Richard Hickock was pronounced dead at 12:41 a.m. Perry Smith was pronounced dead at 1:19 a.m. More than 5 years after the murders, the case reached its final legal conclusion. The Clutter murders might have remained a regional tragedy, remembered mostly in western Kansas, if not for the work of the writer Truman Capote. Drawn to the case, Capote spent years researching the crime, the investigation, the trial, and the 2 men convicted of the killings. The result was In Cold Blood, published by Random House in 1966. The book became one of the most influential works of the 20th century, widely credited with helping to define the modern true crime and non-fiction novel genres. But behind that literary legacy stands a far simpler and more sorrowful truth. 4 people, a father, a mother, a daughter, and a son, were killed in their own home on a November night in 1959, over a sum of money that never existed. The plan that led 2 men to that isolated farmhouse was built entirely on a rumor, the story of a $10,000 safe that Herb Clutter never owned. The case endures as a stark reminder of how thin the line can be between an ordinary night and irreversible tragedy, and of the painstaking, methodical police work led by Agent Alvin Dewey and the Kansas Bureau of Investigation that connected a false prison rumor to the men responsible. The names of Herbert, Bonnie, Nancy, and Kenyon Clutter remain at the center of the story, a family whose loss reshaped a quiet Kansas town, and whose case, decades later, is still remembered around the world.